The day Clara Montgomery turned 21, the world around her changed forever. Birthdays had always been gentle affairs in the Montgomery household. Lavish cakes, strings of fairy lights across the rose garden, and her mother's laughter drifting like music through the estate's grand halls. But this year was different. This year, her father's sharp, commanding voice echoed louder than any celebration, his words binding her future in a contract she never signed. "You are to marry him, Clara," Richard Montgomery said, his eyes cold but resolute as he stood by the oak-paneled study window. The scent of cigar smoke lingered in the air, suffocating her more than the corset beneath her silk dress. "Marry who?" she asked, though she already knew. "Mr. Alexander Harrington, my oldest friend, a man of stature, a man of wealth, a man who will keep this family's name unshaken." Clara's chest tightened. She had met Alexander Harrington only a handful of times. At charity galas, at political dinners, always surrounded by glittering chandeliers and polished champagne flutes. He was older than her father by nearly a decade, and carried himself with an air of entitlement that made her skin crawl. His smile never reached his eyes, and when he spoke, his words dripped with the kind of arrogance only money could buy. "But father," Clara whispered, her voice trembling, "what about love? What about—" "Love," her father cut her off, slamming his glass onto the table. "Love is a luxury for fools. You are a Montgomery. You will not disgrace this family with childish notions. Harrington offers stability, influence, the kind of power no fleeting romance can provide. You will marry him, and that is final." Her mother, seated silently at the edge of the room, lowered her eyes, saying nothing. That silence spoke volumes. Clara's protest died on her lips, drowned in the weight of expectation. That night, as the grand birthday party carried on in the ballroom, guests dancing beneath golden chandeliers, the string quartet's music swelling, Clara stood on the balcony, her breath fogging in the cold night air. The diamonds around her neck glittered, but they felt like chains. She looked out over the garden, at the endless rows of roses her mother had planted years ago. Even the flowers seemed trapped, rooted in place, unable to escape their fate. Life with Alexander Harrington began soon after. The engagement was announced in the society pages, her photograph plastered alongside his in newspapers, her forced smile a mask hiding her turmoil. The wedding was scheduled for 3 months later, and with each passing day, the cage around her heart grew smaller. Alexander wasted no time asserting himself. He sent her gifts, extravagant jewelry, gowns imported from Paris, even a diamond-studded watch she had no desire to wear. At dinners, he would take her hand in his grip tight, possessive. He would speak of their future together, of the heirs she was expected to bear, of the empire they would build. Never once did he ask her what she wanted. The mansion they shared after the engagement was luxurious. Marble floors, gilded mirrors, servants at every corner. But Clara found no comfort there. The silence of the halls was deafening, and every room felt like a gilded prison. She longed for freedom, for laughter, for something as simple as walking barefoot in the grass, unobserved, unjudged. And then she met him. It was a rainy Thursday evening when Clara first noticed the waiter. She had slipped away from Alexander's office, where he was meeting with business associates, and wandered into the estate's private dining hall. The household staff bustled about, preparing for a banquet, but one young man stood out among them. He was carrying a tray of crystal glasses, his movements graceful despite the weight. His dark hair was damp from the rain, and there was a gentleness in his eyes that stopped her breath. Unlike the other staff, who avoided her gaze out of fear or deference, he looked at her directly, not with entitlement, not with judgment, but with quiet curiosity. "Miss Montgomery," he said softly, bowing his head in respect. "Forgive me. I didn't mean to intrude." "You're not intruding," Clara replied quickly, surprising herself. I didn't know we had new staff." "Yes, miss. My name is James Whitaker. I started last week." Clara found herself studying him longer than she should have. His voice carried warmth, his presence a stark contrast to the cold marble walls around them. For the first time in weeks, she felt something stir inside her chest. Something dangerously close to hope. She should have left then, should have walked away, but her feet betrayed her. Instead, she lingered. "James," she repeated, tasting the name. "Well, welcome to the household." James smiled faintly. "Thank you, miss." Their exchange lasted only seconds before another servant called him away. But in those seconds, something shifted. The air between them hummed with an unspoken connection neither dared to acknowledge. Days turned into weeks, and Clara found herself seeking him out without meaning to. She noticed the way he carried himself, always respectful, always composed, yet with a spark of quiet defiance beneath the surface. He would bow when she entered a room, but his eyes told her a different story, one of understanding, of recognition. Their conversations began innocently enough, small talk in the hallways, whispered words exchanged when no one was watching. But soon, Clara found herself confiding in him, about her love for painting, about the books she devoured late into the night, about the loneliness that consumed her in a world full of people. James listened. Truly listened. And when he spoke, his words weren't laced with duty or expectation. They were kind, honest, free. One evening, as the rain pattered against the windows, Clara found herself alone with him in the library. The fire crackled softly, and she clutched a book to her chest, her heart pounding. "James," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Do you believe in love?" He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Yes, miss. I believe it's the only thing worth living for." Tears pricked at Clara's eyes. No one had ever spoken to her that way before. Yet, as their bond deepened, so did the danger. Alexander was not a man who tolerated disobedience, let alone betrayal. His temper was as sharp as broken glass, and his pride could not endure humiliation. If he suspected even a hint of impropriety, James would lose more than just his position. He would lose his life. Clara knew this, and yet every time she saw James, her resolve weakened. Every whispered conversation, every stolen glance, every fleeting touch of fingers brushing against each other's in passing. It was enough to set her soul alight. For the first time in her life, Clara understood what it meant to feel alive, and for the first time, she considered the unthinkable. Escaping the gilded prison her father and Alexander had built around her. But love, she would soon learn, always comes at a cost. The weeks that followed blurred into a strange duality for Clara. By day, she played the role of Alexander Harrington's dutiful fiancé, smiling politely at dinner parties, attending society luncheons, and letting him parade her like a prize he had won. But by night, or rather in moments stolen like forbidden fruit, she became someone else entirely. Someone freer, someone alive. It was James who brought out that hidden self, piece by piece. At first, their encounters remained cautious. A few words exchanged in the hallway, a brief smile across a crowded room. But slowly, Clara's hunger for those moments grew insatiable. She would linger longer than necessary in the kitchens just to hear his voice, invent errands that allowed her to pass through the servant quarters, or pretend she needed a book from the library, knowing he often dusted the shelves there. One evening, as dusk painted the sky in hues of lavender and gold, Clara slipped away from the drawing room where Alexander and her father discussed business. Her silk gown whispered across the marble floors as she moved down the corridor, heart pounding. She had no plan, only a desperate need to breathe. She found herself in the conservatory, surrounded by lush greenery and the scent of jasmine. And there he was, James, carefully watering the orchids. He looked up, startled at first, then softened when he saw her. "Miss Montgomery," he said, bowing slightly. "I didn't expect—" "Please," she interrupted, her voice trembling. "When it's just us. Call me Clara." He hesitated, the weight of propriety pressing down on him. But then, slowly, He nodded. Clara. Her name on his lips felt like liberation. They talked until the lanterns outside flickered to life, about everything and nothing at once. Clara told him of the book she longed to write one day, of her dream to see the world beyond the suffocating walls of high society. James shared his own story, how his father had been a schoolteacher, how his mother had died when he was young, how he worked to support his younger sister back in the countryside. You deserve more than this life, Clara whispered, her gaze fixed on the orchids. He smiled faintly. And you deserve more than the one you've been given. Their eyes met, and in that moment, the space between them felt unbearably fragile. Clara's pulse raced, her breath catching, but before she could speak, footsteps echoed in the corridor. She flinched, stepping back. James lowered his voice. You should go. It's not safe. Her throat tightened, but she nodded, slipping away before anyone could see. But Alexander did notice. Perhaps not that night, but soon enough. He was a man who prided himself on control, and nothing in his world escaped his attention. One evening, after a particularly tedious dinner with investors, he cornered Clara in the study. The air was heavy with cigar smoke and the bitter tang of whiskey. You've been distracted, he said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. His eyes, sharp as daggers, studied her. Your mind wanders. You leave the room when I'm speaking. Tell me, Clara, where does your attention lie? Her heart thudded painfully in her chest. I'm just tired. That's all. He stepped closer, his presence suffocating. Do not mistake this engagement for a choice. You are mine. Do you understand? She forced a nod. Her fingers clenched so tightly in her skirts that her nails bit into her palms. Alexander's lips curled into a smile that was anything but kind. He set his glass down with deliberate care, then leaned close enough for his breath to brush her ear. Good. I would hate to think you were disloyal. The implication hung heavy in the air, and Clara swallowed her fear, knowing better than to answer. That night, when she lay awake in her gilded bed, tears slipping silently down her cheeks, her only solace was the memory of James's voice. Steady, gentle, real. As summer deepened, so too did her secret bond with James. Their encounters became bolder, though always cloaked in caution. In the library, their fingers brushed as he handed her a book. In the garden, hidden among the roses, he whispered words that made her heart soar, and one night, when the moon cast silver light across the conservatory, Clara found herself unable to resist any longer. She stepped closer to him, her breath quickening. James, she whispered, I don't know how much longer I can endure this. His hand trembled as he reached for hers, rough calluses brushing against her delicate skin. Clara, we're treading dangerous ground. I don't care, she said, tears glistening in her eyes. For once in my life, I want to choose. And I choose you. His resolve broke. Slowly, cautiously, he drew her into his arms. The moment their lips met, the world seemed to fall away. The suffocating mansion, Alexander's shadow, her father's expectations. All that existed was the warmth of James's embrace, the truth of his touch. It was a kiss filled with longing, with defiance, with a love neither of them had dared to dream possible. When they pulled apart, breathless, James whispered, If anyone discovers... They won't, Clara interrupted, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her fear. They can't. But in her heart, she knew the truth. Never stayed hidden for long. The following weeks were a dangerous dance of secrecy and desire. Every smile, every glance. Secrets across the room carried 1,000 unspoken words. And yet, Clara could feel the noose tightening. Alexander's suspicions grew, his temper flaring at the slightest hint of disobedience. One evening, after returning from a business trip, Alexander arrived unannounced at the mansion. Clara was in the garden with James, their conversation innocent enough, but the proximity of their bodies would have been damning to anyone with eyes. "Clara!" Alexander's voice thundered across the lawn. She jolted, stepping back as James bowed quickly. "Mr. Harrington," James said with practiced deference. Alexander's gaze swept over them, sharp and calculating. For a moment, Clara thought he might strike her then and there, but instead, he smiled thinly, a predator biding his time. "Darling," he said to Clara, extending his arm. "Come inside. We have matters to discuss." Clara obeyed, her heart pounding, but not before glancing back at James. His eyes met hers, filled with silent warning. "Be careful." That night, Alexander's mask slipped. "I don't like secrets, Clara," he said, pacing the study. His voice was calm, but his hands trembled as he poured a drink. "Do you have something to tell me?" She forced herself to meet his gaze. "No." He studied her, searching for cracks in her composure. Then, with a cruel smile, he said, "Good, because betrayal is something I cannot forgive." The threat lingered long after he left the room, chilling her to the bone. Despite the danger, Clara's resolve only hardened. The more Alexander tried to cage her, the more desperately she clung to James. He had become her anchor, her lifeline in a sea of suffocating expectation. And one night, as thunder rolled across the sky, she whispered the unthinkable into his ear. "Run away with me." James froze, his arms tightening around her. "Clara." "I mean it," she said, her voice breaking. "I can't stay here. I can't marry him. I'd rather lose everything than lose you." He cupped her face in his hands, his eyes searching hers. "If we do this, there's no turning back. You'll be disowned, hunted. Do you understand?" "I understand," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "But I'd rather be penniless and free with you than a prisoner in gold with him." For a long moment, silence hung between them, broken only by the storm outside. Then James kissed her, fierce and desperate. "Then we'll go," he said. "We'll find a way." But even as they began to whisper plans of escape, of trains to distant towns, of small cottages far from society's gaze, danger lurked ever closer. Servants talked. Shadows listened. And Alexander Harrington, a man who thrived on control, was not a fool. He knew. And Clara and James were about to discover just how far he would go to keep what he believed was his. Rumors in a mansion spread faster than fire. It was only a matter of time before whispers reached Alexander's ear. A maid claimed she had seen Clara and James walking too close in the garden. A butler noticed Clara visiting the kitchen more often than usual. Alone, each observation was innocent. Together, they painted a damning picture. Alexander's pride, already fragile, cracked under the weight of suspicion. One evening, he summoned Clara to the parlor. The fire blazed in the hearth, but his expression was colder than ice. "You've been careless," he said, his tone deceptively soft. "Do you think I don't notice where your eyes wander? Who you seek out when you think no one is watching?" Clara's stomach twisted. She tried to remain calm, her voice steady. "I don't know what you mean." Alexander leaned closer, his gaze like steel. "Don't play games with me, Clara. I built my life on uncovering lies. If you betray me, if you make me a fool in front of society, you'll regret it." Her pulse raced, but she forced herself to look him in the eye. "I am not your property, Alexander." His hand shot out, gripping her chin so tightly it hurt. "You are whatever I say you are." His voice dropped to a hiss. "And if I find out that servant has touched what is mine, I'll destroy him." Tears burned behind Clara's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She wouldn't give him that satisfaction. When Alexander released her, she fled to her room, her whole body trembling. She knew now, beyond doubt, that their secret was no longer safe. She found James the next morning in the stables, where he was helping one of the grooms carry hay. The smell of horses mingled with the crisp air, but Clara barely noticed. "He knows," she whispered, grabbing James's arm. "Alexander knows." James's eyes widened. He pulled her into the shadows, away from prying eyes. "What did he say?" "He threatened you," she said, her voice breaking. "If he finds out for certain—" "Then we can't stay," James interrupted firmly. "It's too dangerous." Clara's hands shook as she clutched his shirt. "But how? Where do we go?" He thought for a moment, his jaw tight with determination. "There's a train leaving for the coast in 2 nights. I have some savings. It's not much, but it will be enough to get us far away from here. We'll disappear, Clara. Start anew." Her heart swelled with both hope and terror. 2 nights, she repeated. "I can endure 2 more nights." But as the hours passed, Clara's every step felt heavy with dread. Alexander's eyes followed her at dinners, his words sharp and cutting. Her father, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath his roof, praised Alexander for his discipline and strength. Clara wanted to scream, to shatter the crystal glasses on the table, to tell them both she was not a pawn in their game. But she held her silence, knowing freedom was so close she could almost touch it. The night of their escape arrived cloaked in darkness. Clara dressed in plain clothes, one of the maid's old dresses borrowed in secret, and tucked a small bag of belongings beneath her shawl. Her heart thundered as she crept through the empty halls, each creak of the floorboard sounding like a gunshot in the silence. James waited for her near the back gate, his figure barely visible beneath the moonlight. When she reached him, he took her hand, their fingers intertwining. "Are you ready?" he whispered. She nodded, though her whole body trembled. "Yes." They moved quickly, keeping to the shadows. The village station lay only a mile away, and the night air was cool against Clara's flushed cheeks. Each step felt surreal, as though she were walking out of one life and into another. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. As they neared the edge of the estate, lanterns flared behind them, voices shouted. Clara's blood ran cold. "Stop!" Alexander's furious roar split the night. James tightened his grip on her hand. "Run!" They sprinted across the fields, the wet grass soaking Clara's skirts, the sound of pursuit thundering behind them. Lantern light bobbed like fireflies in the distance, and Alexander's men gave chase. Clara's lungs burned, her heart hammering in her chest. But James's hand never let go, pulling her forward, urging her onward. "Almost there," he shouted. The whistle of the approaching train pierced the night, a beacon of hope. The station lights glimmered faintly ahead, but so did the torches of their pursuers. They reached the tracks just as the train slowed into the station. Clara stumbled, her legs weak, but James caught her, lifting her onto the platform. They darted toward the last car, breathless, desperate. And then Alexander's voice bellowed from the platform behind them. "Clara!" She froze, her body trembling. James turned, shielding her with his own. Alexander advanced, his face twisted with fury. "You think you can shame me? You think you can run away with a servant?" He spat the word like venom. "You belong to me." "I belong to no one," Clara shouted, her voice breaking with raw defiance. The platform fell silent for a heartbeat, the night air thick with tension. Then Alexander lunged. James met him head-on, the 2 men colliding with brutal force. Clara cried out as fists flew, the sound of flesh against flesh echoing above the hiss of the train. James fought with the strength of desperation, but Alexander was larger, fueled by rage. "James!" Clara screamed, reaching for him. For a moment, it seemed Alexander would overpower him, his hands tightening around James's throat. But with a surge of strength, James shoved him back, sending Alexander stumbling against the edge of the platform. The train's whistle shrieked. Clara's heart stopped as Alexander teetered dangerously close to the tracks. But he caught himself, his face contorted in hatred. "This isn't over," he spat, his voice raw. "I will find you. I will destroy you both." James grabbed Clara's hand, pulling her onto the train just as it began to move. The doors slammed shut, cutting off Alexander's furious shouts. They collapsed into a seat, breathless, shaking, their hands still clutched together. Clara buried her face in James's chest, tears streaming down her cheeks. "It's over," James whispered, though his voice trembled. "You're safe now." But Clara knew the truth. It wasn't over. Not yet. Alexander Harrington was a man who thrived on control, and he would never accept defeat. And so their journey began, not just toward freedom, but toward a life constantly shadowed by the threat of being hunted. The weeks that followed were both blissful and terrifying. Clara and James found refuge in a small coastal town, renting a modest cottage where the sea breeze carried the scent of salt and freedom. For the first time, Clara woke without dread, her days filled with laughter, her nights with the comfort of James's arms. She painted again, filling canvases with colors that reflected her newfound hope. James found work at the harbor, his hands rough but his spirit lighter than she had ever seen. They built a life out of simplicity, out of love, out of the belief that they had finally escaped. And yet, shadows lingered. Every unfamiliar face in town made Clara's heart race. Every letter delivered to the cottage made her fear discovery. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, James found her staring out at the sea, her eyes clouded with worry. "He won't find us," James said gently, wrapping his arms around her. "But what if he does?" Clara whispered. "What if he takes you from me?" James pressed a kiss to her hair. "Then we'll keep running. As long as we're together, nothing else matters." Clara closed her eyes, letting the sound of the waves steady her heart. For the first time, she believed him. Months passed, and Alexander's threats never materialized. Perhaps he had given up. Perhaps the scandal of Clara's disappearance had forced him to retreat into silence. Whatever the reason, Clara and James were free. On a crisp autumn morning, as golden leaves drifted from the trees, James knelt before Clara in their little cottage, holding a simple silver ring. "I can't give you diamonds," he said softly. "I can't give you mansions or titles, but I can give you a life built on love. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Clara's eyes as she nodded, her heart overflowing. "Yes. 1,000 times. Yes." Their wedding was held on the beach, with only a handful of kind villagers as witnesses. Clara wore a simple dress, her feet bare in the sand, her smile radiant. When James kissed her, the waves roared as though the sea itself celebrated their union. It wasn't the wedding her father had planned, nor the one society expected. It was better. It was theirs. Years later, Clara often thought back to that gilded prison, to the girl who once stood on a balcony and longed for freedom. That girl had found it, not in diamonds or power, but in the eyes of a man who had nothing to offer but his heart. And it was enough. More than enough. Because true love, she had learned, was not something to be arranged. It was something to be found. And she had found hers.